What's up everyone? Today I'm gonna make a video that I probably should have made a little while ago. You see, my most viewed videos have been lens comparisons. Those videos could have been a lot better if I had made another video explaining the background knowledge needed to understand lenses. So are you ready to talk about the ins and outs of arguably the most important part of a camera? Let's get into it. Let's start out with the basics. Every camera is going to have a lens, even the one on your phone. I'm going to be focusing on interchangeable lenses, meaning they're separate from the camera. Lenses really have one job, and that's to focus light onto the sensor of your camera. Without a lens, all a camera can see is a blur, and it's all blown out because there's just so much light hitting the sensor. The lens takes care of bringing light into focus and directing that onto your sensor so that you can get a clear image. There are primarily two types of lenses. One is a zoom lens and the other is a prime lens. Prime lenses only have one focal length, which we'll get into in the next section, and zoom lenses can, well, zoom from one focal length to another. They each have their pros and cons, but I won't be getting too deep into that in this video. So just a second ago, I alluded to focal lengths. Now this is a very important aspect of lenses. In fact, lenses are often broken up into different categories based on their focal length. But what is focal length? To put it simply, it's the angle of view from your camera, or how much of a scene is going to actually be in your shot. Focal length is measured in millimeters. The lower the number, the wider the angle and the more you can fit in your shot. The actual reason behind this is a little confusing. Just remember that the lower the number, the wider your shot will be. Back to breaking up lenses into categories, there are three main categories. There are wide lenses, there are normal or mid-range lenses, and then there are telephoto lenses. Now, wide-angle lenses are going to capture, as the name suggests, a very wide image. These kinds of lenses are usually used for things like landscape or real estate photography. These lenses usually have quite a bit of distortion, and that's why generally they're not used when the subject is a person. Now this suggestion can be broken, and it often is. It's just a general rule of thumb. Up next we have normal or mid-range lenses. These are the ones that, well, have the most natural look to them. Normal lenses are usually what's used for portraits, and they're the most commonly used lenses. These usually range from 35 to 50 or 75 millimeters. Keep in mind though that all of these numbers will be a little bit smaller if you're using an APS-C or a micro four thirds sensor. The last type of lens is a telephoto lens. These lenses are very zoomed in. These lenses are usually used for things like wildlife photography or sports photography. They keep you from disturbing whatever your subject is, and that's why it's a really popular choice for those types of photographers. Those are the three main types of focal lengths. Now, let's talk about how you can distinguish between different lenses and also how you can operate them. All lenses have at least one ring, and this is your focusing ring. Twisting that ring adjusts how far away your camera is focusing. Now, some lenses will have a second ring. This second ring controls the focal length or zoom of a lens. I think it's kind of clear, but the second ring is the primary way to tell between a prime lens and a zoom lens when you're just picking it up and looking at it. There may also be a few switches on the lens. One is usually to toggle autofocus and manual focus. Another switch that isn't as common as an autofocus switch is a stabilization switch. This switch allows you to turn on and off stabilization if it's built into your lens. This feature usually only comes on higher end lenses, and we'll talk about that in another video on down the line. Now, there are almost always going to be some numbers somewhere on the lens. The most universal spot that I've found for these numbers though is on the front of the lens. And these numbers tell you basically three different things. The first is the focal length. To find this, you're going to look for a number that ends in mm, or millimeters. There's sometimes actually two numbers that end with this, but we'll talk about how to distinguish them in just a moment. Now, in this cluster, there may be two numbers. This indicates that it's a zoom lens, and in this case, it goes from 15 millimeters on the low end to 45 millimeters on the high end. And if there's just one number, that indicates that it's a prime lens. The next number to look for starts with a 1, and then a colon, and then some numbers. This indicates the aperture of a lens. If you don't know what aperture is, I go into detail about it in my previous video about the exposure triangle. And the same rules apply to it as to the focal length. There may be multiple numbers. This isn't the case on all zoom lenses, but if you see multiple numbers, that means it has a variable aperture. That means that the first number is the widest your aperture can get at the lowest focal length, and the second number is the widest your aperture can get at the highest focal length. And then there is one more number, the second one that ends with millimeter or mm. How you distinguish between this and the focal length is there's a little, what looks like a no sign by it. It's like, a circle with a line through it. This number tells you the filter size that is accepted by the lens. Again, filters are a topic for a future video, so we'll get into that later. But if you're looking for the focal length, just think of that no symbol as saying, hey, this is not the focal length. The only other thing I can really think to talk about is lens mount. Now, the lens mount is where the camera and the lens join together. Generally, different brands of cameras have different mounts. Even the same company may have different mounts. For example, Canon has EF, EFS, EFM, RF. It's confusing, man. There are a few of these that can be converted using an adapter. One example of this is EF to EFM, but those are under very specific circumstances. For example, you cannot convert an RF lens to an EFM mount camera. Now, I'll be the first to admit that I do not know a whole lot when it comes to this subject. All I can really say is be extremely careful what lens you buy. Just do a little bit of research and make sure that a lens will fit your camera or has an appropriate adapter. I think that's finally it. That's everything you need to know to understand lenses. If you enjoyed, please hit the like button. For more videos about filmmaking, photography, gear, and more, please consider subscribing to my channel. That will help me out a ton. If you have any questions or suggestions, leave a comment down below. Okay, I'm done. See you in the next one.